I think Jehovah's Witnesses are different from many other religions in the sense that they are not emotional. They want to have this kind of academic bent to how they present things. They want to be seen as logical and rational. It's not just about emotion. So the whole idea of even finding these quotes is to present our ideas as being irrational. Look, the world,
Yeah.
scientists agree with us, academics agree with us, so this must be rational, right? But at the end of the day, what's the point of that? Only to create a veneer of rationality, but it doesn't work because you're already coming in with an opinion, an agenda, a bias, and you're just quote mining to find something to support that and make it look rational.
Well, hey everyone, my name is Jake, and I'm here with Ben Kopilow. Ben is a former elder. He used to work in the writing department in the Australian branch, and he did an interview a few years ago now with another ex-Jehovah's Witness named XJW Fifth. It was actually the first piece of ex-Jehovah's Witness video material I ever watched. The first thing I ever watched that was critical of Watchtower in any way, and I was really afraid. And Ben and Fifth made me feel welcome right at home. Like it felt like, okay, this is somebody I can trust. And your experience has stuck with me for a long time, Ben. And now it's been a few years, and I wanted to catch up with you. I wanted to talk a little bit about your experience in the writing department. That's a focus of mine on the channel, is just the way that the organization works and the language that they use, just the kind of nitty gritty behind the scenes. So I'm interested in that. But for people who haven't seen that, which I'll link in the description, your previous interview, maybe just give us a brief background of your time in the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Okay, well, the short summary is I was, for all intents and purposes, born in. My parents started studying when I was about 7, so I was pretty much brought up in it. I don't really remember a time pre-witness life. So yes, and I just went through all the processes. I was a good kid, goody two shoes, you might say. Always did the right things. I was never rebellious. So I just naturally progressed in the organisation. I was a ministerial servant. I got married young. I became an elder at about the age of 27. I pioneered as soon as I left college, so I gave up going to university. I did very well at school, but I sacrificed going further with my education to pioneer. So I pioneered for about 20 years. I was an elder for about 17 years or so, I think, before I stepped down. So I was just one of those people that took the truth really seriously and devoted my life to it, lived and breathed it. And yes, as a pioneer and also working on the writing desk, yes, it was my whole life.
Yeah, you
That's kind of
were.
the background.
Yeah, and you're married to you met your wife in the organization.
Met my wife pioneering. We pioneered together until she had to stop. We were married in the Kingdom Hall. We were the full-on, fully devoted, fully believing Jehovah's Witnesses. So for anyone who uses the no true Scotsman idea that we weren't really ever true believers, no, we were all in. We were true
Yeah.
believers. Well, I was true believer. I'm not speaking for my wife. Sorry. Yeah.
Well, let me explain that term in case people haven't heard it, but because that the no true Scotsman fallacy. I maybe like yourself didn't really know a lot about logical fallacies until I started to think more critically, just because that's not really something that you're taught necessarily in the religion. And as I understand it, that's basically like what Jehovah's Witnesses will say. Well, anybody who would ever leave and question the organization was never really a Jehovah's Witness. Like, no real Scotsman would ever, I don't know, something with haggis. I probably should have looked this up ahead of time. Do I have that right?
No, that's pretty much right. Yes, it's like all Scotsmen like haggis, and if you say, "Well, actually, I'm a Scotsman, I don't like haggis," then you would say, "Oh, yeah, but you're not a real Scotsman, right?"
Right. Well, if I can then kind of jump to the writing department, how did you get involved in that?
So there was an elder in my congregation who sort of took me under his wing, saw me as someone that he wanted to mentor, and he happened to be the sort of the boss of the writing desk, basically, in Australia. Um, I need to explain, I guess, the structure of the department. The Because Bethel is in Sydney, which is not the capital of Australia, despite what some might think. Canberra is. Um, the National Library is in Canberra, where I live. So we had a team of researchers and writers in Canberra because we have access to the National Library here, to the ANU, the university libraries, that the Sydney people working in Bethel didn't have access to, because Bethel in Sydney is kind of way out in the suburbs, in the outer areas of Sydney, so it's quite a distance to travel into the city to get access to the libraries and other things, whereas we have really easy access in Canberra. So this particular elder sort of mentored me from when I was very young. My father was very different to me. He was disfellowshipped about 20 years ago. I don't quite know how to work him out, but I kind of figure he was converted to being a JW more for the social aspects of it. He never really took it that seriously. So I think some of the elders in my congregation saw me as a potential person they could mentor in light of the fact that my father wouldn't do that.
You needed a spiritual
So,
father.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, spiritually mentor me. But so he was he was unusual too in the fact that he was a Greek scholar. He was one of the very few witnesses that actually could understand the original Greek. And I think the society relied on him quite heavily because of his knowledge of Greek in doing research on that. So, yeah, so he introduced me to the writing team. It started initially with him just sort of giving me little projects to research. So stuff that he was writing, he'd challenge me with different things and ask me to do research on those things. He'd take me to the library, show me how to look up academic journals, show me how to look up source material. So he taught me a lot, which was really good. And then eventually I progressed from there to actually coming up with ideas for articles. So he wanted me to actually write articles instead of just doing the research. So part of how the writing team would work, which was a bit eye-opening to me, and I think most people don't understand this. I think a lot of people assume that, you know, all the brothers in America, that whether it's the governing body or the higher ups, actually do all the writing or come up with the ideas. They don't. A lot of the ideas are fed to them from these writing teams. So we, as a writing team in Australia, would come up with ideas for articles, and these could be things that we were interested in, or ideas that we had, or it might be something that circuit overseers would bring up as issues that they see when going around to the congregations. But basically, we would write an outline for an article, just sort of outlining the main thrust, the ideas, the main talking points. We would send that into the head office in America, and they would either approve or not approve that idea to be then written and researched for an article. So
Interesting.
I would come up with ideas and submit those outlines, and most of them actually got approved, funnily enough. So yeah, I obviously like the ideas.
Very
So then what
nice.
they would do is they would send back an approval for that article, and they'd tell you what they wanted it for. So they would say, okay, we want this article as just a little one-page filler, or we want this to be a sort of 4-page article in the wake, or we want it to be a big 12-page cover spread for the Watchtower or something. So they would give you the parameters of what the article would be, and then you go ahead and research it and write it then, and then send it back to them. But what they'd also be doing is they might, if they really liked the idea and it was a main cover series, they'd have other teams in different countries also working on that same idea, and then they'd often combine the two articles in different ways. So the article that you saw published often bore very little resemblance to the actual manuscript that you sent in. And because it would go through so much of an editorial process, it was really butchered all the way through. And when it came out, you would recognize it as your article, but only just.
Yeah.
The editorial process was quite brutal, but yeah, that was kind of how it worked. So we'd come up with ideas, we'd submit them, they'd approve them, they'd rework them, and it was quite a process. People also need to understand the time frame involved. I think a lot of people get very conspiratorial and say, oh, this article came out just as this was happening in a court case or something. It doesn't work like that. They're not that quick in how they produce material. And proof of that is the whole COVID thing. Remember during COVID, we were still getting material on how to do door-to-door presentations the whole time the COVID was
right.
So you can see how they couldn't pivot quickly to, okay, let's do presentations for phone witnessing or letter writing. Instead of pivoting to that, they just went with the material that they had prepared a year earlier or whatever. So they're not pivoting and doing things quickly. So the time you write an article and the time you saw it actually in the magazine, it could be a year or 2 years, even 3 years later before it was published.
Sometimes I remember that being a talking point, like we would mention that as witnesses. I remember specifically that and maybe it was around the time when the Sandy Hook shooting happened in the United States, there was very shortly after that an article on like gun violence in either the Watchtower or Awake. And the fact that it had been prepared, almost a year earlier or however many months earlier, and it just so happened to coincide, was like, oh, wow, this is proof that Holy Spirit is working through the organization so that we have food at the proper time. The daily text you would hear things like that too.
What you have to realize, it is just coincidence, and it's because there's only so many topics, right? Those topics just get recirculated every 3 or 4 years. So eventually you're going to have an article on violence or gun violence every few years, and it's going to happen to align with something that's happening in the world, so.
Yeah, no, that's your COVID example is really good because that is an example of like, well, boy, if there was one thing that would have been good to start writing about in advance, it would have been that.
So I have to give them credit with the website now, with the little article. And I guess because it's easier now that the articles are so simple and dumbed down that all they do is a couple of paragraphs. So on the website, when there's something happening, they'll have this thing now where, gun violence, what does the Bible say? Paragraph and a couple of scriptures, and that's it.
Yeah, and it's often just the same articles that they might have published 5 years ago, but like you said, because maybe there's always a war, and then during election season they can put stuff about political things, so it's all very timely. Before we get into that, because you mentioned the simplicity of the publications, I was wondering, what is this time frame that you were working for then? Because there's the Watchtower and the Awake magazines, both of those in the time since you left and even in the time that I've left, like they continue to be very simplified. They used to be much more in depth. So what time period were you there?
Okay, so I was doing this in the early 2000s. So just after the year 2000, I was doing that for a couple of years. So it's 20 years.
So this
ago.
Is still
Things have probably
they have probably 2 of each a month then.
Exactly. They almost don't need a writing department anymore because they're just, as you say, recycling the same material over and over. And it's all video content now, and cartoons and charts.
Yeah. Despite that, the organization is very insistent that it produces, these really accurate publications and that they take research really seriously. And so I wanted to kind of get your reaction to this clip, maybe to kind of set us up here, because this is something that I remember being very encouraged by when I was a witness, to use that phrase. Like I found it encouraging because I would really wonder about that. I think as a witness, I was always a little thrown off by the fact that in school, and I just had public schooling, we went through so much education on how to cite our sources and make a little bibliography, and that's very rare for the organization. They like it's inconsistent whether or not they'll cite sources. Sometimes it's vague.
Yeah.
So this is David Splain. He's promising us we're going to have fun, so this is good.
Now, someone might ask, why is it necessary to be so picky, to be so fussy about accuracy? And an answer I like to give an experience that I heard about a few years ago. In Northern Europe, there was a man who accepted a Bible study from Jehovah's Witnesses. And when he was asked what motivated him to want to study, he said, "I read an article in your Awake magazine on trees." Now, I happen to be a bit of an expert on trees. And after I read the article, I said to myself, that article was so well documented. It was so precise. Any organization that is that careful when writing about trees is going to be just as careful when teaching me the Bible. And on that basis, he accepted a Bible study.
So, did you write that tree article? I guess is my first question.
No. But my first question is, how would that reader know how well sourced it was? Because they don't put the citations in the article.
This was a big question of mine when I watched this, in 2015 or whenever this was. I was like, but they don't source things.
And the fact that he could actually take that comment seriously, which is to say, if they're accurate in one thing, they'll automatically be accurate in another thing. I mean, that's just the most obvious fallacy, isn't it? To say that.
Well, yeah.
Because you can be highly motivated to be accurate in one area of your life and completely not in another area of your life. You can't just assume that. And the fact that David Splain doesn't see the problem with that reasoning shows you just how poor their level of thinking is.
Yeah, they kind of insist that, people reading these magazines are so impressed by the journalistic integrity of them. They can sense that this must be the truth. I guess
Let me address the accuracy of it, though. And
sure.
in a way that is true. So when we would do an article like that on trees, yes, we would research it, and we would have to, as well as sending in our manuscript, we would have to send in all our photocopies of all our citations or research or any quotes that are in the article. We'd have to send in a copy of the book that we got it from or the journal, including the page before and after, so that the editors could check the context of the quote, all that sort of stuff. So, yes, I was taught the importance of always going to the original source material. I was taught to not use quotes out of context. I was taught to be accurate. So all of that is true. And all of that sounds good on the surface, but the reason for the accuracy is so that they don't is to protect themselves, basically. So, because someone would write in, and you might remember back in days gone by in the Awake, they used to publish readers' letters, right? And readers would write it and say, "Oh, you said this, and that's not accurate."
Yeah.
And they would write
the questions from readers was actually questions from readers. Now it's not. They just call it that.
Now it's just their talking points. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they've always been concerned that someone's going to question their accuracy, and so they are accurate, but it's for the purpose of covering themselves. But the problem is, yes, they will go to great lengths to be accurate about something about trees, but they certainly do not apply that accuracy to any important subjects: theological, biblical, archaeological, scientific. Accuracy just goes out the window, and their kind of standards for how they use quotes and everything is secondary to their rhetorical goals, to the way they want to present information. It's a bit like if you look at organisations like Answers in Genesis or the Creation Research Institute. You have scientists and theologians who work for them. They have to sign a waiver saying the Bible comes first. Like any research or anything I do has to support the fact that the Bible is inspired and true first and foremost. So accuracy is only secondary to that principle, that guiding principle. It's the same with the way the brothers work. Yes, they're accurate to a fault until accuracy will conflict with the way they interpret the Bible, or the way, or something contradicts the Bible or their theology. Then
Right.
accuracy doesn't matter. It's proving the Bible that matters.
Yeah, well, you said that, and I was like, wait a minute. He says something exactly like this in this talk. And so, okay, let's watch this, because this is basically an example of exactly what you're talking about. He's
It's
giving a little
going to be
multiple
fun.
choice.
Here's the first statement. According to the Smithsonian Knowledge Encyclopedia, the Egyptian Sphinx was constructed around 2550 BCE. The Egyptian Sphinx was constructed around 2550 BCE. Well, the problem is with the date, 2550. The global flood occurred about 200 years after that date. So what are the chances that the Sphinx survived the flood? Unless, of course, you think that that's how the Sphinx lost his nose.
Ha ha! It was fun.
That's a perfect example, because they're
Yeah.
not concerned to know whether the date is accurate, right?
Right.
They come with the presupposition that it can't be accurate because it conflicts with Bible chronology. So their presupposition just trumps everything else. And so what would happen then? So as a researcher, if I was asked to research that date, what I'd basically do is try and disprove that date. So they're not interested if that date is accurate and what supports it or what doesn't support it. They're only interested in proving that date's wrong, because they've already decided it must be wrong because it conflicts with Bible chronology.
Yeah.
Makes sense? And that's where their research and their academic integrity and honesty just completely falls over. They make no attempt to understand why that date is accepted academically.
Yeah.
What dating methods were used, whether those dating methods are valid or accurate. They'll make no attempt to understand that, and they'll make every attempt to try and undermine or discredit the dating method that's used, if they would even understand the dating method that's used. Yeah.
Essentially, they need it to be the case that their interpretation of when certain Bible things happen, they need that to stay true to lead up to things like their 1914 teaching, for example, and their belief that there was a literal entire global flood. It wasn't just like a small localized thing. No, it was a global flood. It happened on this date. And so the fact that we have this existing monument in the Sphinx, where we have vast amounts of evidence for exactly when it was built, no, that all must be wrong, because we already know the truth, which is that the flood happened.
And it's not a problem for more liberal Christians who don't take it all so literally, right?
Right.
But for them, because they're biblical literalists, they have to keep the integrity of that timeline. And the problem is they then will bury their head in the sand, because, there's trees that are older than the flood. It's not just the pyramids. There are ongoing civilizations that are older than the flood. There's so many things older than the flood, and all dated in different ways, all assessed in different ways, and they won't then even approach that information. Take, for example, when was the last time they ever published anything in depth on evolution versus creation? Right. We had the creation book back in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the current information is two very slim little brochures, right?
The blue and the orange ones, yeah.
But you've got to ask yourself, why are they not publishing? I mean, because when the creation book was published in the 80s, that was, 30 years ago. Imagine how much stuff we've discovered in 30 years in terms of fossil discoveries. Genetics wasn't even a thing back in the 80s, right? All the genetic proof we have for evolution now is so overwhelming. Why have they not addressed that? Because they can't. And they just bury their head in the sand and say, oh, DNA, look at that. DNA is proof that there must be an intelligent designer. But they won't look at what the DNA shows, right? They don't want to read the DNA and see they're just looking at it. Look, there's a book, so someone must have written it. But they're not reading the book. They're not looking at what the genetic code says about the writer, right? If you picked up a book and said, oh, this must have been written by someone, and it's half full of sentences that are gobbledygook and don't make any sense, you know, what conclusion would you come to about the writer? So they won't go back and publish anything more about this because the evidence has become overwhelming. And the same with dating methods. When was the last time they published an article on dating? Because we have so many more dating methods now, you know. All the stuff they wrote about carbon dating in the 80s, you know, there was some validity in that, mostly because they misrepresented it and didn't understand how it works and the time frames that you apply it to. But now there's literally 20 or 30 different dating methods: resonance spin dating, luminescence dating, so many different forms of, you know, isotope dating, and they all corroborate each other, and they corroborate with tree rings and other things, right? Why have they not attempted to discredit this dating if they don't agree with it? Again, because they can't. And so this is again where their intellectual honesty or lack of is laid bare. If they can't discredit it or disprove something, they will just ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist. And I think that's why they haven't published anything for 30 years on these topics and addressed them seriously. They will only address them on the most simplistic talking points. Each of those brochures has 5 talking points, which reduces the whole concept to the most simplistic, you know, stuff imaginable. In my own personal example of this is that when the creation book first came out, I was 14. And I was so excited to see a publication with all the citations, right? Because we had never had all the references. I literally went to the library and looked up every reference just to confirm that they were quoting it correctly. And I was so stunned, I guess. I was so impressed by their scholarship, thinking, wow, this is just so amazing. I did that same exercise a few years ago as I was deconstructing, because now what I didn't have at 14 was the critical thinking skills and the tools to understand how they were using those quotes. All I literally did was check the quote and did they quote it word for word. That was the rudimentary analysis I did as a 14-year-old, right? I did not understand how to understand what the author was really saying in the context of the quote. So I went back and did that exercise a few years ago, armed with better knowledge and skills. And what I found to my horror was literally every single quote, almost without exception, in the creation book. And I think you can actually find online a person who's actually itemized every quote and done all this. So the information is out there. But literally every quote was a misrepresentation of the topic, or a taking out of context of the original author, or just some dishonest method of making their point and quoting some scientist to prove it. You know, it was just such dishonest quote mining and misrepresentation of what the scientist was saying that I was really shocked and appalled. And that, I think, is the difference, you know. So, yes, you might say they were accurate in the sense that they quoted the quote accurately, but the intellectual honesty was not there. They were not trying to understand what the science was saying about evolution and then addressing it. No, they were just quote mining some scientists to make their viewpoint look more authoritative.
Right. Quote
Doing that
mining.
in a genuine way, yeah.
But, you know, to get back to your perspective on this, one of the things that I'm always really interested in is, did I really believe it in that way? And when I, like your experience reading the creation book, when that came out, I had that when those brochures came out, which I'm going to assume was like 2013 or 14, around that time. And it seemed like, you know, an answer to my prayers. It all made total sense to me. But of course, I was really looking to have an excuse not to worry about evolution, you know, because I was. And this felt like, oh, good, okay, I've got something that seems smart and intellectual. But you're there actually doing research and writing. I'm imagining that you don't think of yourself at the time as a witness doing this. You're not thinking like, well, I am biased. You're thinking that you're doing research. And so, like, what was your mentality at the time?
Yeah, you don't. Obviously, you don't think about that. Again, it wasn't until I was deconstructing that I understood about confirmation bias, and I had to go back and relook at everything I thought I believed through that lens of my biases.
Explain what that is, maybe, for our audience.
Yeah, okay. So there's many biases that can affect our thinking, but confirmation bias is kind of the granddaddy of them all. And basically, what it means is any information that comes your way, if it aligns with what you already believe, you're more likely to accept it. If it doesn't align with what you already believe, you either just ignore it or dismiss it, or you may not even notice it. It may not even become into your sphere of awareness. Our brain is so good at just filtering out information that doesn't align or confirm what we already believe. And it's so hard for new information to penetrate our existing beliefs. So, and over a lifetime of indoctrinating ourselves in a belief system, everything. So yes, so as a researcher, I was totally driven by my biases, but that was part of also how we researched. We weren't going in with the idea of let's say, whatever the topic was, well, let's see, what all the experts in the field say, and then report to our readers, what the consensus of opinion of experts is. That's never the way we approach the topic. You go into a topic already with your biased sort of leaning or your angle or your agenda, and then you look for information that confirms your opinion. And that's how the writing department works. So as I said, we'd come up with a topic that we'd recommend to the governing body. The outline for that topic would be, what's our agenda, what's our angle on this topic, right? And I guess the research was not really important, other than to kind of prop up our opinion by some kind of academic quotes or worldly sort of sources because, what's the point of that really? Like, if you claim to be inspired and you claim to be the one true channel to God, why do you need worldly quotes in your magazines? It's only to create the illusion of academic authority or the illusion of accuracy or the illusion of something, but you don't really need it. You can just say, this is what we believe and this is why, and because we're inspired, this information is correct. But because they so desperately want to be also viewed by the world as, I think Jehovah's Witnesses are different from many other religions in the sense that they are not emotional. They want to have this kind of academic sort of bent to how they present things. They want to be seen as logical and rational, and it's not just about emotion. So the whole idea of even finding these quotes is to present our ideas as being irrational. Look, the world, scientists agree with us, academics agree with us, so this must be rational, right? But at the end of the day, what's the point of that? Only to create a veneer of rationality. But it doesn't work because you're already coming in with an opinion, an agenda, a bias, and you're just quote mining to find something to support that and make it look rational. You're not actually presenting the academic consensus, which you could argue is then the rational position to take.
Well, right, because if they were going to do that, they wouldn't believe that Jerusalem was destroyed in 607. If they were interested in just honestly presenting a plurality of evidence, they would concede that evolution's true, right? So they can't go in and say like, well, what's our best scientific? They'll use the science to support their points, or the archaeology or whatever, and then ignore it when it contradicts it and say, well, we can't trust these worldly experts.
They will go to the ends of the earth to find the most obscure person, the most fringe scientist or academic who happens to support their view. And this is what shocked me in my own research, like the fact that they quoted from, spiritualists or other people who we would normally think of as, evil or demonized or whatever, the fact that they would quote them for academic reasons to support, the New World Translation's rendition of a certain verse, why would you quote somebody who's a person who, is involved in seances and demonic activity?
Mm.
Why would you use those kind of sources to prove your point? It just shows the desperation. If they can't find a mainstream person to support their point, they will go to any lengths to find the most obscure person, as long as it corroborates their thinking. And that shows you what's really going on here.
I think you're totally right. You used the phrase earlier, like to maintain a certain illusion. I think it's also, though, like you didn't have the conception that you were being some mastermind creating a false narrative when you were writing.
No.
It is, I think, a part of a self illusion that you are creating. Like, wow, look at all this research that I did to support the truth. Look at our Bible and all of the charts and quotes from people who maybe have a degree who are saying something in support of our translation of the Bible or whatever. Like, it is kind of to self-reinforce that you have the truth too, I think.
There's a certain arrogance that comes with that, and I was guilty of it myself, I'm ashamed to admit. And you can see it in the kind of smugness of David Splain. That's why he looks smug.
Yeah.
There's an arrogance to that thinking that, we have the truth, our perspective on the world, because we have this enlightenment from God. We are smarter than the rest. I'll never come out and say that, but there's this kind of self-belief in the back of your mind that you are smarter. I mean, think about it. I, as a 14-year-old teenager, would challenge a evolutionary biologist if I met them at the door.
Yeah.
And I would think I could understand and prove evolution wrong better than they could. I thought I was smarter than them, and I knew nothing about what I was talking about. But my indoctrination led me to believe I was smarter because I had God's perspective on it. My bias has made me smarter. It's bonkers to think about it.
There was this fascinating Anthony Morris Gilead class that someone posted online. It's a recording of him giving one of these lectures in a Gilead class, and he says to the group,
"And you're all Bible scholars." Yeah, really. These people like to throw those terms around, and Jehovah's got the real scholars in the truth,
They kind of laugh, and he's like, no, yeah, I mean, the world, they think they have Bible scholars, but we're the real scholars. And you really do think that because, of course, you have the truth. No one else does.
Yeah, exactly. Another classic example. Another thing just came to my mind as an example of this. There was a scientist that was quoted in an Awake, I think it was in the 90s, might have been the early 2000s, I can't remember now. And people wrote to him and told him, look, the Wake magazine has misquoted you. He wrote to the society and challenged them and asked them to take it down. And eventually they did. They took it off the online version, I believe, later. But the point is, if you really cared about accuracy, like a newspaper, if a newspaper gets something wrong, what do, Jake? They print a retraction, right?
Yeah.
An apology. Have you ever seen the society print a retraction? I can tell you in that particular case, they never did. They never said, look, sorry, we're going to take this article off the online version because we misrepresented this scientist and we apologize to him. They're never going to do that because it's not really about accuracy. If they really cared about accuracy and intellectual honesty, that's what they would do. If a worldly evil newspaper run by Satan's system has enough honesty to do that, where is their honesty? But no, it's about the illusion that they are the smart ones in the room, that they are the real Bible scholars. So they're never going to admit that they misrepresented something or got it wrong, because they at all costs have to keep the illusion running for the rank and file. It's the whole Wizard of Oz thing, right? They cannot let them see behind the curtain. and see
Yeah.
that don't have the academic skills to be assessing this information. And of course, when you leave and you actually listen to scholars, you probably like Dan McClellan or Bart Ehrman or other people, you actually listen to the depth of knowledge of these scholars, you realize that the witnesses are just babies playing in a sandpit they don't understand.
Yeah, and I had that experience. Maybe we can move into, when you started deconstructing, but I had that experience. I think realizing, wait, maybe this isn't the truth, and starting to actually just listen to widely available things that are just lectures given by a Bible scholar on YouTube, and just realizing I knew nothing about the Bible. I didn't know anything about the Bible. I knew a very specific set of talking points about the Bible. I knew my doctrine of my religion, and that religion has a narrative about what the Bible is and its role. And none of that is based in archaeological or historical fact. So was it your experience doing this sort of research that led to your beginning to have questions or doubts?
No, not directly.
Interesting.
What the catalyst for it all was actually a little book called The Art of Thinking Clearly by Rolf Debelly. It's just a small book. I highly recommend it to everyone. In fact, there's two books I think everyone should read, no matter what level. I think these books should be taught in a high school. I cannot believe we don't teach kids critical thinking. But the main kind of Bible for me now is The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, right? I think that should just be a book that's part of everyone's education on how to think skeptically. But if you're not ready to read that book, which is quite heavy, the book The Art of Thinking Clearly is, you could read it in an hour. It's very light, it's very easy, and it just goes through the basics, what confirmation bias is, some of the heuristics and mental shortcuts our brains use, and the flaws that causes in our thinking. It was reading that book which started me thinking about my own biases. And it's weird, but the connection it made in my brain, I always had an issue with the fact that so many witnesses were into all sorts of crazy alternative therapies, right? Alternative medicines.
Yes.
Our congregation was full of people who saw naturopaths and chiropractors, and that's not even the worst of it. There was a couple in our congregation that used to have this magic machine that would ionize water in some magic ways that could cure cancer and cure all your illnesses. And
Every Kingdom Hall's got a couple water
and they were
ionizers.
sickest people, right? They never came to the meetings because they were always too sick, but they had this machine that could cure you of everything, had all sorts of psychological problems, and yet were life coaches. It's just bizarre. So the thing about me, I was always interested in science. I guess growing up as a JW, you kind of have to suppress all that. You can be a sort of armchair scientist. So when I was in school, I was top of my class in science and maths. My teachers all wanted me to become a nuclear physicist. I was really good at this stuff. I loved it. And I gave all that up, but it's always still there in me, right? And so when I started, and I've always been interested in how the brain works, the thinking processes, but I've never allowed myself to really read much about it. So picking up that little book and understanding how good thinking works, I started to realize the same problems the same reasons that people get into alternative medicine, which is they often rely on anecdotal evidence for the claims. There's no rigorous double-blind studies done for these things to prove they work. It's usually the placebo effect or something like that. But I realized the same problem applies to our belief system. The same biases and anecdotes are how we prove our belief system. You look at the way the society proves everything. It's by interviewing someone who said, well, I realize it was the truth because I had an emotional experience, or it made sense, or the brothers answered my questions, or it's always some anecdote of why it's true, right? It's never
Yeah.
hardcore evidence, right?
It
So I
was
guess
well, the tree evidence is pretty powerful.
Any organization that is that careful when writing about trees is going to be just as careful when teaching me the Bible.
So that's really the little book that got me thinking. And I started discussing it with some of my more sort of intellectually minded friends as witnesses. And what I realized too, they were scared of this information. When I started throwing these ideas around and say, what do you think about our biases here and this and that? And like, they did not want to talk about it because I think once you do, you start to see the problems with your belief system as well. So I guess that happened, this was about 2014, 15 when I started deconstructing. So this is sort of 10 years later. So unfortunately, like I didn't keep on in the writing team after a few years because it just got too much for me, and being an elder and a pioneer and everything else. Because another crazy thing is we weren't allowed to use the time that we spent on research and writing as a credit towards our pioneer hours. You had to do that on top of it.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, and to clarify for anybody watching this who's not a witness or never has been, like, you were not getting paid to do this, I'm assuming? Like, it's all unpaid, volunteer.
I was still told I still had to get back then it was 90 hours if you're pioneering.
90 hours of field service.
So I still had to get my 90 hours. I was doing 20 hours, 30 hours a month of this other stuff, as well as being an elder and having to do all that stuff. Like 2 full-time jobs. So in the end, I just went mad trying to keep up with everything. And I just said, look, I have to let it go. But yeah, so it wasn't sort of to 10 years later that reading that book then triggered a whole lot of things for me to understand where I'd gone wrong. And why my beliefs, and I basically sort of went back to square one after reading that book. I said I have to go back and understand why I believe what I believe, and that's where you go back and you start with the whole chronology of 1914. Why? Where's the evidence for 607? Where's the evidence for all the reasoning along the way? And I explained this in my interview with Fifth. I think there was a letter I wrote to one of my fellow elders about all the assumptions we make along the way and all the flaws in the reasoning and the flaws in the starting point of the archaeology, and there's so many issues just with that thing. I think two of the points he referred me to a Watchtower article which I'd already read and decided really didn't answer the question. But what again shocked me was all the other points, he just said, yes, they're assumptions, but so what? That was his words, so what? So that just really blew my mind. I thought, okay, so here's a bunch of confirmation bias, a bunch of assumptions. There's no evidence for any of these steps. And here's this, intelligent elder saying, well, so what? Who cares? And that's really then, I guess, what pushed me into researching things further. I think once you go back to square one, and it's hard to do because we will never get rid of our biases. That's the first thing you learn about biases is you can't get rid of them. You just have to be aware of them as much as you can. And one thing I asked myself too is if I wasn't brought into this religion by my parents and a Jehovah's Witness knocked on my door as an adult, would I be convinced by their arguments? And the way I always answered was that no, I wouldn't. This is before I even left. I said no, I wouldn't. And then I comforted myself by saying, well, how lucky that my parents are the ones.
Yeah.
And how lucky I was that they brought me into the truth, right? And so I guess it was quite easy for me then to say, okay, let's go back to being that person. Let's take off everything I know was brought up to believe. Let's go back to square one without any preconceived ideas. And once you do that, the whole JW theology falls like a deck house of cards very quickly. And once I'd done that, I said, well, I need to go back to the Bible and do the same process with the Bible, right? And once you do that, that house of cards falls pretty quickly as well, right?
I want to talk about what it has been like after you left. When you talked to Fifth, you talked about what that was like to deconstruct and to lose your faith. But I also want to talk about what it has been like since then. How did you get from a place where I don't believe this is true anymore to I'm going to talk about this on YouTube?
Yeah, okay. I should just, as a side note, say that the cat's probably out of the bag now, that I am actually an atheist agnostic, or agnostic.
Yeah.
Atheist.
Same.
I never said that in my interview with Fifth because I didn't want to make that an issue, right? I just wanted to tell the story up to that point. And even today, I still don't like to be defined by that term because to me, it's just, it's just the answer to one question. Do you believe in God? No. Okay. But it's not my worldview, right?
Right. Yeah.
For me, the more important thing is, what methodology do I use for my worldview? For me, that's methodological naturalism. I accept that. I don't have faith in science, but I accept that methodological naturalism, the scientific method, is the best thing we've ever come up with for working out reality, the truth of reality. So that's how I form my worldview. Secular humanism forms my worldview because I don't believe in the supernatural or anyone else who's coming to save us. So we as humans have to do what's best for us and work out our problems. So anyway, that's just an aside in case people are offended by the idea that I'm an atheist and think that is a problem that biases everything else. It's like, no, that's not even an issue. It's like...
Yeah, it's a single position on a single issue. You just... Yeah. The answer to whether or not you believe in a deity is no. Yeah.
Yeah. So getting back to your question, sorry. My brain goes on these tangents, so I have to finish the thought.
I run a tight ship on this channel. I'm not used to tangents, but...
So after I left and stopped going to meetings, I had a few shepherding calls from some elders. They came around and I said to them, like, you know where I stand. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in the governing body, all that stuff. I said, why don't you just disfellowship me? And they kept saying to me, oh, look, no, we respect that. We would never disfellowship you unless you started promoting your ideas in the congregation, right? We'll just leave each other alone. And I thought, okay, well, that's fine. We have a sort of a truce. And then a year later, what happened was the congregation that my wife and I used to go to, they sold the Kingdom Hall, as they do lately. And so two congregations were combined. So there was kind of a new body of elders. So I had a call from one of the elders. And I think this is an interesting story because, again, just shows their lack of honesty. He rings up, and I know this elder, not intimately, but he was in a neighbouring congregation, and he knows me. And so he rings up all sort of coy saying, oh, Ben, I just ring up to see, what your status is, where you're at, all this sort of stuff, just for the records, for the books. And I was like, actually, Jake, I'm actually going to name names in this. I didn't name names in my interview with Fifth back then.
Wow.
I didn't feel it was appropriate at the time. I didn't want to. But I feel like now that they have disfellowshipped me, the gloves are off, right? There's no reason to be, circumspect.
They announced your name at the congregation.
Well, exactly. They've announced my name publicly, demonized me publicly. So, I don't see a reason to not name them now. So anyway, this elder by the name of Robert Leeming, for anyone who's in Canberra, will know him. He rings me up and says, what's your status? And I was sort of like, Robert, you know what my status is, the elders have talked to me. We've had arguments, you know exactly where I stand on things. What's this really about, right? And after sort of, beating around the bush for 10 minutes, he finally got to the point, which was, they'd heard reports that I'd been talking to people. And that is true. Occasionally, I had an office in the city where I live. I'm a photographer, so I have an office in the city. And because I was so well known in our circuit in the city, people were, I guess, shocked when I left. And occasionally, a brother or sister would come and pop into my office and say, Ben, why don't we see you anymore? What happened? The thing is, and this is what I explained to Robert, I said to him, look, I've never gone out of my way to talk to someone or try and harm their faith or help them deconstruct. I said, but if people come to me and ask me directly why I don't go, I'm going to tell them. But I always give them the opt-out. I say to people, look, I'm happy to tell you why, but you might find that harms your faith, so opt out of the conversation now if you're worried about that. But they always said, no, we really want to know, so please proceed. I always asked for consent before I told them anything. And so Robert's answer to that was, okay, well, I guess that's fair enough. That's between you and them. They've got a right to ask the question and you've got a right to answer it. And I said, okay. So I said to him, so are we good? Does our gentleman agreement stand that you will not take action against me unless I go out of my way to promote people or to promote my ideas or harm people spiritually or something? And he said, yes, that's fine, Okay, so this is about 3 years now after I've left. So I kind of figured, and for anyone who's watched the Royal Commission and Jeffrey Jackson's testimony, you will know that one of the big points he made is that, we're not spiritual police. We don't go hunting people down and trying to discipleship them. And he was asked about, what if someone had Christmas lights in their house? Would you take? And it's like, oh, no, we just leave things alone, live and let live, which we, of course, know is total lie. So anyway, I was naive enough to think that they would leave me alone, that it had been long enough. I didn't identify as a witness anymore. We had a gentleman's agreement. My wife told me otherwise, and she proved to be correct, so I have to eat humble pie there. And she didn't want me to do the interview. She knew that they would find out and it would cause trouble. But I kind of thought, well, it's a safe time to do it now. I thought, if I'm doing it on an XJW channel, nobody can accuse me of trying to promote stuff in the congregation. Because, they would have to be looking at apostate channels to even find this interview. I asked Fifth not to put my name in the title of the video so that, if people were Googling my name, they wouldn't accidentally find it.
Right.
The only way you would find this video is if you're already watching apostate videos and it potentially could come up in your feed as a recommendation, right?
Yeah.
That's the only way. So I did everything I could to make sure that it would only go to the people it was directed to, which is people who are already in the process of leaving or have left or questioning things. This was not directed to members of the congregation. I never sent a link to anyone. I didn't put flyers on the car's windscreen wipers and the Kingdom of Car.
Right.
I did nothing that I thought could be construed as promoting this to the congregation. However, they viewed it differently, and if you think that elders or the organisation does not spy on you, well, sorry to disabuse you. I literally had a call the following morning that interview went live. They called me the next morning. Someone had seen it, reported it, and I was invited to a judicial hearing the very next day. So,
yeah. Okay. See, this is it's frustrating, but also validating because I had the exact same experience, and I told the elders the same thing, which I was like, I genuinely don't even understand how somebody in the congregation could just stumble across this unless they're looking for it. Because I used YouTube for years and years. I would, of course, avoid anything even remotely in that realm. I never had just randomly, quote unquote apostate content pop up. And yet, as soon as I showed my face on my channel the next day, I got a call from the elders. So,
here's something interesting. Here's something interesting though. Christina has appeared on your channel, right? Her face has been seen. She's commented on an apostate channel. Has she been invited to a judicial hearing?
No, but people know that she's done it.
People know, yes. So what does
Yeah,
that tell you? As a
I
woman in
know.
the organisation, you do not matter. They cannot
Wow,
even
yeah.
care. They do not care enough about Christina to disvalue her because she's a woman.
Oh, that's no, it's true though. I mean, I think it's like I also wonder if it's like it would just be more public. Well, I don't know. That they're not thinking that much about it. I think you're right.
That,
I think
that just shows the misogyny at work here. As a man, when you say something, the next day they're after you. As a woman,
yeah.
no, doesn't matter. She can say what she likes. It's like her opinion doesn't even register or matter, or it's not important. It's bizarre. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
What?
really interesting. Yeah, I think you're right. I'm gonna run that by her afterwards. See what she thinks. What was did you ever get an explanation as to like how it was found? Like, because I never
Oh,
really
so
did.
that's no. I mean, exactly. I asked for it. Even Melinda, my wife, asked for an explanation from them. Part of what happened after I was invited, there was three things I asked for them, which are just basic rights. I don't know what the technical legal term is, but if you're charged with a crime, you have certain basic rights, which is obviously, to
Yeah.
be told what the crime is, what you're accused of. You're allowed to have representation, just all the basic things.
Right.
Now, because I was an elder and I was doing judicial cases myself, and I knew what was written in the elders manual. I know all the policies. I know how it works. So I tried to appeal to them based on those policies. So the first thing I wanted them to do was put everything in writing. I wanted a record of everything. And I know in the elders manual it does say, look, you can put it in writing. What I found out very quickly though was the elders manual, they basically just threw that in the bin. They were getting direction from the head office because of again who I was a high profile elder, I was giving talks at circuit, district conventions. Because of my level of knowledge in the society, I think I was an extra level of threat to them. So
Mm.
they would not do a thing with me without first consulting head office. And head office were giving them instructions that overrode what was actually in the elders manual. But all I asked for was that put the charges in writing. I want to know who my accusers are and who is going to be judging me. I just wanted the names of my accusers and the names of the three brothers on my committee. And I wanted someone to be present to be my advocate. And I explained to them the reasons why. I wanted to be able to prepare a defence. And I can't prepare a defence unless I know what I'm accused for specifically and who I'm accused by, right? So simple, basic things. And guess what? They denied every request, which is important with something I'll come back to later if you remind me about getting my documents under the privacy
Yes.
legislation. So I tried to. So the only way in which I was somewhat difficult and didn't cooperate was I just asked for my basic legal rights to be respected, right? And so, of course, I asked all these questions verbally as well, and I didn't even get a straight answer verbally.
Mm.
So I said, what am I accused of? Well, apostasy, all right. But see, apostasy is such a broad term. What does that even mean, right? So I said, what specifically did I say in the interview that could be classed as apostasy? Like, did I lie? Did I misrepresent the organisation or defame them in some way that was dishonest or a lie? Like what actually did I? Did I promote any false religious teachings?
Right.
Um, you know, all these things could be considered apostasy. So when I asked them for specifics, what did I say that was a lie or false or a misrepresentation? I got crickets. They could not come up with one thing. After pressing them multiple times, the only answer I eventually got was that I had accused Jeffrey Jackson of lying at the Royal Commission, which I did. I accused him of lying.
Yeah.
All right. So I said to them, all right, well, if that's what this is all about, if that's the only charge that you have that I accused him of lying, let's see if my accusation was in itself a lie, right? Because if I'm accusing him a fellow brother of lying, shouldn't the procedure be that you need to go and talk to that brother about the lie that he's telling and him to appear before a judicial case, right? Is he above the law? I asked him that. Is he above the law? If someone accuses him of lying, does he not have to answer to a judicial hearing? And basically they ignored that question because what can you say, right? He is
What
above
can you say?
the law, right?
Yeah.
And I said, you really need to report these. And I said, I'm not the only one making it. Thousands of people have commented on the fact that they felt he lied. Why is that not being reported to his local congregation? Why is he not being hauled before a judicial hearing, right? That was all I could. And I said to them, okay, so before we even go down this path, we need to sit down together and watch his testimony together to ascertain whether my assessment of his testimony was in fact a lie. Because if we can clear up that matter, if that's all you've got on me, well, that solves the problem. We don't need to have this hearing. And of course, you can guess what their answer to that was. No, we're not going to do that. Right?
Yeah. No thanks.
No. So they wouldn't tell me who, and again, this is the stupid thing, they wouldn't tell me who saw the video, who my accuser was. I suspect, and I can't prove it obviously, but I did mention one of the elders in my previous interview with Fifth. His name is Dietmar Klein. I'll out him now. He's the elder that wrote the answer to me when I emailed him about 1914 and all the problems with it. He's the one that wrote back and said, so what? What does that matter? And I think because he knows that I was talking about him, even though I didn't mention his name, he knew, took that very personally. And even though he was one of my closest friends as fellow elders, he was the one that was most vitriolic to me after I left. And I kind of assume, he's very smart. He works for IBM, so he's very technologically savvy. It would not surprise me to know that he was spying on my social media or anything else I was doing online and immediately found his way of getting me. Again, I don't know if that's true. That's all I can assume. But the thing is, somebody did find it, report it to the elders. They would never tell me who. They would never tell me what the real accusation was. So, they strung me along for a few weeks as we went back and forward with whether this would happen or not. I asked them also, because normally the way a judicial case works is the accused person gets to make a statement. The elders will always ask them at the beginning of the meeting, what would you like to say? Have you got something to say for yourself? That's normally only just a sort of formality, cursory thing before they dig into the... And usually most people don't have anything to say, because they don't even know they have that opportunity, because they don't know how these things work. They don't have access to the manual, right? They don't know the procedures. So they're like, oh, I'm supposed to say something? Like, all right. So because I knew this was a thing, I said to them, like, will I be allowed to make an opening statement? And how long will you give me for that opening statement? You can see where I'm going with this, right?
Yeah.
And to their credit, I have to give them credit for this. They said, yes, we will allow you 15 minutes maximum for an opening statement.
Wow.
I thought, well, that's fair enough. But what I found out from my wife later, so I decided not to go in the end. I decided there was just no point. I decided this is a kangaroo court. Do you know the expression kangaroo court in the States, or is that just an Australian?
Yes, but I've never actually known what it meant. People just say it.
Okay. It means it's like a court case for appearance's sake, that really it's just a farce. It's just for show. There's no real legal procedure. It's all just for show. It's meaningless. So that's the way I kind of view this, that they were just going through them. They have to, it's just paperwork to them, right? They just have to do this procedure to get rid of me, to disfellowship me. So in the end, I decided not to go. and they disfellowshipped me in absentia, as they call it, even without me there.
Oh, yeah.
But a couple of interesting things along the way, which I think give you some insight into, again, the way the organisation works and kind of their heartlessness, really. One thing, and again, it proves the lie of, because they will tell you, judicial hearing is all about helping the person, right? And even more so now with the new rules, that they are leading someone to repentance, which I can tell you as an elder, that's something we were never allowed to do under the old rules. You were not allowed to kind of use leading questions.
Lead the witness.
Right. They had to demonstrate repentance then and there. You were not allowed to kind of help into that. So now this whole idea that you have multiple meetings with them, leading them to repentance, I'm going down a sidetrack now, but this whole idea is just completely contradictory and basically makes a mockery of every judicial committee I was ever a part of. Because it's basically saying I did not help them to repentance, therefore I did not do the loving thing, therefore that person probably shouldn't have been disfellowshipped by all rights, right? They just
because that's, what does that say for all the judicial committees that ever happened under the previous arrangement? I wanted to just kind of clarify something for the viewer, just to reiterate that, by the time you did this interview on XJW 5th, you said this, I just kind of wanted to reset this. Like, it had been a few years, right? It had been 3 years. You had just kind of quietly stepped away from the organization. It was a crisis emotionally for yourself, and people can go back and watch that interview. But it wasn't like you just discovered it wasn't true and immediately started posting on the internet. Like, you were quiet, you kept to yourself. Years later, you do an interview on someone else's channel, and I would defy anyone to watch that and say that you were like a bad faith attacking the organization. Like, it is so just your perspective of what happened.
It's just me telling my story. That's all it is.
It's just you telling your story. And the fact that years later they still kind of want this retributive justice and are willing to go through this weird, paperwork and accusations and dealing with the branch just to disfellowship you, just speaks to a weird, obsessive vindictiveness behind the whole process to me.
And it's all because I'm a threat. They see me as a threat. Because like I said, if it was my wife, if she was the one that had left or whatever, and it was her that did the interview, probably wouldn't have cared. Right, but because of who I am and I'm a man, that's a threat to them, right? Yeah, they will come after you. Doesn't matter how many years later it is, because I know all the skeletons in the closet, right?
Right.
That's why I'm an even bigger threat to them. The other thing I wanted to say about the process was that at one point, like, this was destroying my wife. She was just like, we were both still in that stage where we're just going through a lot of depression, suicide ideation, all sorts of things, because we were arguing, having problems in our marriage, trying to sort through all that. At one point, she went to the elders, and again, because in the elders' manual, if they're following the rules, there is a clause that says if the person is expressing any suicidal thoughts or seems mentally unstable, you are to basically stop all proceedings until that person has stabilized or can get the help they need, and then you resume the proceedings later. That's the rule, right? So Melinda went to them and she said, look, she basically said to him, look, you are killing me. It doesn't matter if you disfellowship Ben. Ben's moved on with his life. He's not going to care. What you think you are doing to Ben, you're actually doing to me. You're killing me, because this is going to mean she's already being soft shunned by most of the congregation, even though she's a loyal sister, right? Just because of me and the fact that she hasn't left me and she's being loyal to her marriage, she's being soft shunned. And she knows if I get disfellowshipped, she's virtually going to be totally cut off because of her relationship with me. And this is devastating to her. This is, she's third generation. This is her whole life. It's all she knows. So she went to them and said, you are killing me. I am suicidal. She actually expressed that. And she wasn't just making this up to try and stop proceedings based on that clause.
Yeah.
I literally worried someday she would leave the house hysterically, and I didn't know if she would come back or whether she'd drive the car into a tree. That's how bad it was. Anyway, she told them this, and their response was, "We don't care. Sorry, sister, but we got to do what we got to do." And that horror, that I just could not believe, because these are men. Like, for all that they do, and for all I disagree with them, they're good people, right? They're
Yeah.
otherwise loving, kind people, but their religion. And this is something I'll come back to later too. Their indoctrination, their religious ideology forecloses their genuine identity and kindness and turns them into a monster. How could you say to a woman, "We don't care that you're suicidal, a faithful sister"? How could you say that? We don't care. We just got to do what we got to do. So their priority was getting rid of this threat, this danger to them. And I wasn't even a threat, as I pointed out to them. That was more important than caring for this sister's emotional needs and the fact that she's vital, right? And then they confessed to her later on. They said to her, "Look, from the moment Ben posted that interview, the conclusion was always he was going to be disfellowshipped. That was always going to be the result. So it was never a question of whether I was repentant or, that whole story they tell that it's really about helping the person. In the case of apostasy, that is definitely not the case." And they admitted that to Melinda. They just said, "No, that was always going to be the outcome. It was never in doubt." And it's like, well, why play all these games of inviting me to a meeting and giving me a fair, creating the illusion that I have a fair hearing and all this stuff? Why not just do it? Just disfellowship
It's
me?
weird.
Which I told them to do 3 years earlier. I said, why don't you just disfellowship me? You know how I feel about things. But to make this big show and dance of it all, just insane.
It's kind of hard to imagine that sort of thing happening at just a local church. Somebody decides, I don't agree with this anymore, I'm going to stop going. And then 3 years later, they talk about, their experience, their personal feelings about it on a podcast, in that church going after them and causing this upheaval and the way they treated your wife. Like, it is monstrous. And I had that experience too, because I did go to my judicial committee and I knew all of the brothers very well. Like, I had known them all for years. One of them was kind of like family through marriage. And it is, I think we've all experienced this. It is like a switch goes off when you talk to somebody and they sense that apostasy thing, which is always very ill-defined in the religion. They're not really given a lot of context for what it really is. It's just talked about as this very nebulous, scary thing. But when you start to go down a path, it's like a switch goes off, and you're not talking to your family anymore, your old friend. You're just talking to this person who now sees you as an adversary of God himself.
Absolutely. So after they made the decision, I actually blocked all their texts because, again, I knew the procedure was they had to inform me of the decision before they could announce it, right? I really didn't want to talk to them any further, so I blocked all their numbers on my phone. But I had written to them earlier and I said, look, anytime you want to tell me anything or contact me, here's my email address, right? And I did this because, again, I wanted it in writing.
Yeah.
And going back to that point about the writing, I'm sure Bethel told them not to put anything in writing because they would know that, or they would believe I would use it against them. And in a way, that's right. I would use it against them
Yeah.
if they wrote something I disagreed with. But the point is, you can't even stand behind what you believe or what you're doing enough to put it in writing. And that tells me that there's something wrong with what you're doing, right? Because
They know that it would look bad.
Exactly. If you're doing the loving, good, proper, kind thing, There's no way you can't put that in writing. But they know, as you said, it's going to look bad if that got out. And so they won't have anything in writing. So after they made the decision, they tried to contact me and couldn't, because they wouldn't send me an email and put it in writing. They just wanted to tell me verbally. Oh, just before I go into that too, sorry to go backtrack here, but I just wanted
No
to
problem.
tell you too about a marking talk that was made before my disfellowshipping. I didn't find out
Oh.
about this till many months after it happened. My wife never told me about it at the time. But they did a marking talk about me, about apostasy. But what they did is, Melinda was, instead of, you would think the kind thing to do would be to, talk to Melinda before the meeting and say, hey, we're going to do
Yeah.
a marketing talk about apostasy. It's obviously to warn people about your husband. Maybe you might not want to come to the meeting today. It might be a bit hard for you, That would be the lovely,
Yeah.
right? She was at the meeting. She sits down the front. We've always sat down the front, right? About 10 minutes before the talk was due to be given, an elder comes down to the front of the hall, visibly to everyone in the hall, drags her out the back to tell her that there's about to be a marketing talk. She's in hysterics, crying up the back of the Kingdom Hall. Do you not think everyone's going to know what's going on, right? They don't use my name in the talk, but obviously everyone's going to know this is something to do with Ben and Melinda, given she was dragged out of the meeting and reacted like she did.
That's awful.
And then again, just showing their lack of compassion, after the meeting, she was hysterical. She was like, what do I do? Am I supposed to go home and tell Ben that he's been marked? Am I supposed to now tell people they can't come over to our house? What do I do? What does this mean? And again, the average rank and file JW doesn't understand the intricacies of what marking means versus disfellowshipping and all that.
Right, because it's rare. Yeah.
Yeah. So she's in hysterics, not knowing what to do. And you know what they did, John? They just let her go home. Instead of sitting down with her and saying, look, can we take you home? Can we explain, this is what it means,
Yeah.
what you have to do now, giving her some comfort. Like, how could you let a sister go home that hysterical? Like, why? Like, if all I can say is how I would have done it when I was an elder. Like, if I was in their shoes, I would have said, sister, you're coming home with me. We're going to have a cuppa. We're going to hash it all out. And I'm not letting you go home until I feel like you're
Until you're safe and you're
calm and at peace, right? How could they do that? Anyway, that's just.
Here's the thing about this that's extra disgusting is that viewers at home don't know how absolutely lovely Melinda is, and this is the sweetest, nicest person, and the thought of them treating her like that is just really, really awful.
Yeah, absolutely. She's the most. Yeah, I mean, I'm biased again. Here's my bias, but yeah.
Back to bias, I know.
Sweetest, kindest, hardest person on the planet, which is why I married her. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. So, getting back to the timeline. So yes, they couldn't get in contact with me, so they tell Melinda at the hall one Sunday morning, we really need to announce this. We need to tell Ben why, how do we get in touch with Ben? Right? And she told them, he's blocked your number. You need to write to him like he asked you to. But she did tell them this is a Sunday morning. She said, Ben's at home now. And I'll forgive her for saying this because I don't think she should have done it. But again, she was hysterical. But she told them to go to our house and see me because she told them I was at home, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so no problem. That's all she could do because, in her situation, she's like at wit's end. She doesn't know how to handle this. So I'm home eating my lovely cooked breakfast in my back garden, and I see these two elders I know. One of them is Dietmar, that big German elder, and so I see them go around and knock on my door, and I know what they're there for. I'm just going to ignore them. I'm not playing by their rules anymore. So they get no answer. So they come around the house to my back gate, which was shut. all right? They saw me sitting in the back garden. So instead of asking permission to enter my property, they just walked straight into my backyard, walk up to me, and it was embarrassing for me because I'm literally in my dressing gown, right? I literally got out of bed, made myself some bacon and eggs. I'm just sitting there in my dressing gown and slippers. And again, showing no respect or dignity for my, how I'm,
No.
and just the power play of it, right? Too many
Or trespassing laws.
trespassing laws, too many trespass come in, and they're not like, Ben, we've got something we need to talk to you. Can we come back later? Would you like to get dressed? Nothing like that. No respect. Just come and tell me, we had a meeting with this fellowship, you. And so I challenged them. I said, look, I thought we had a gentleman's agreement. And because he was one of the elders that came on the shepherding call, Dietmar, I said, you sat here 3 years ago and told me you would not disfellowship me unless I promoted things to the congregation. I said, I've kept my end of the bargain. In what way did I threaten the spirituality or attack anyone in the congregation? And again, well, your interview, people could see it. And I'm like, well, if people want to see it, that's their prerogative, right? I don't force them. I didn't send them the link. I didn't, even if they came across it by accident, I didn't force them to watch it, right?
Right.
That's their prerogative. You're taking away their free will. And I said to them, look, I get that you think I'm a threat. I said, but I have done my best. I said in my interview, I did my best to be reasonable and balanced and honest in the way I presented information. I even commended you elders. And
You did.
In no way did I come across as attacking you or the society. I just gave an honest account of my story and feelings. And I said, so the other factor is, to give you the context for this, Melinda and I live with my mother and her mother, right? So we look after both of our mothers. We all live together. We're their carers. So I live with 3 active witness sisters, right? And the thing is, obviously I had discussions with them initially when I left. I had some discussions with my mother, but we agreed very early on the only way this is going to work if we're all going to live together is we don't talk about religion in the household, right?
Yeah.
I only ever discussed with my own mother. I have never brought up anything with Melinda's mother out of respect for their relationship, right? That's Melinda's prerogative. And I challenged these 2 elders. I said, look, my mother-in-law is at home right now. Why don't we go inside and you can ask her from the horse's mouth if I've ever tried to talk to her about my apostate ideas or whether I've ever tried to harm her faith in any way. Why don't you go and ask her yourself, right? Which you should have done. I said to them, this is stuff you should have done even before the judicial hearing. You should have actually asked the people I live with, which they never did. I said, go in there right now and ask them if I've ever tried to talk to them about this. And of course, no, they adamantly refused to. No, we're not going to do that. Now's not the time to do that. And they, I tried to engage them and they did engage with me, but it got so vitriolic, they basically said, and this is the big German fellow Dietmar that said this to me, he basically said, you are the devil's henchman. You work for Satan now. And that's how we're going to treat things going forward, right? And I said to him, well, I'm sorry you feel that way because I tried, I needed to get my story out there. I thought I could. I said, I tried to do it in a respectful and fair way. I said, I've never, as I said, approached anyone or advocated publicly. I said, but if you do this, the gloves are off now, right? By your taking this action, I've got no reason not to speak out publicly against you. So are you sure that you really want to view me as the enemy? Because for the last 3 years, I have not been your enemy, but now you are making me your enemy. And that's the craziness of what they don't realize. And so then what happened was, as I said, I never approached people before, but where my office was in the city, they used to do the city cart work there. They call it the they got that special name for it, which is
Metropolitan
Metropolitan witnessing, yes. So they used to set up their cart literally right outside my office. So I'd walk down some stairs out of the building, and 10 meters in front of me is a cart, right, of all the whole right there. And so I went up to the sisters and I'd say, look, again, I was polite. I said, look, I was an elder, I've left. You being here really triggers a lot of bad things for me. And every day when I go to lunch, I see you here. Can you move your cart down to the other end of the city? Because honestly, you are so triggering for me here. And they're like, no, we've got a right to be here. We're not going to move our cart. And I'm like, all right, well, I've got just as much right to be here and talk as you have. So I'm going to stand here and tell you everything I know about your organization, right? So they're like, doing their thing.
Did they really do that?
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much.
Wow.
But you can only keep that up so long, and I can be a bit stubborn, so I just kept talking. Eventually they packed up and left. But then again, they're back the next day, and I said, look, we can do this forever. I'm just going to stand here and talk to you until you move, right? And so eventually they got the overseer, and of course it has to be a man overseeing everything,
Right.
who's an elder that an old elder I knew. So he was actually good. I'll give him credit. He did the right thing. He said, look, Ben, okay, I understand. Let's try and work this out. And he agreed that they'd move the cart down to the other end, which I was pretty happy about it because where I am is very busy. So they had to move their cart down to very unbusy. So I thought, that's a bit of a win. But anyway, and then what happened is that German fellow, Dietmar, he started doing the cart work in the city. So he would come and sit on the cart right near my office. And I would come and sit down on the bench where he was sitting and just talk to him. And he would do the same thing, just go sing kingdom songs. Right?
Really?
Yeah. He'd be like, we're Jehovah's Witnesses.
No.
But he couldn't control himself. He got really vitriolic towards me as well, and started taking photos of me and said he was going to report me to the police for persecuting and attacking them and all this sort
For
of
sitting on a park bench talking.
Yeah. It got really acrimonious. And I'm like, well, this is what I warned you about, right? You made an enemy out of me. I never bothered anyone prior to this. So
the cart witnessing thing is so strange because I did a fair amount of it. Me and Christina both did, actually, the metropolitan witnessing. And it's like the way it's set up, you are trained and specifically told not to get into prolonged conversations with people. Because, I don't know, people might be hesitant to come up to the cart if they see a conversation, which, by the way, it would be so rare that anybody even wants to stop and talk that I think that shouldn't be a concern necessarily. But it's sort of like if anything happened, like if there is any sort of criticism, if the conversation is contentious in any way, it's just pack up and leave. And I think that is probably good from a safety standpoint. But first of all, where is their concern for safety in the door-to-door ministry where people might have weaponry in their house and witnesses might go inside? And second of all, why is there no confidence in your ability to defend the truth? They just will shut down and leave.
There is none. In fact, the only people that actually talk to them on the carts, I believe, are witnesses from another country who are visiting and like, oh, look, there's the brothers at the carts.
Yes. Yeah.
They do that. Or some born-again dude who wants to debate the Trinity with you, right?
Yep.
And who can actually defend his belief scripturally or whatever.
Yeah. Well, how has it been since then? Because that sounds all very contentious, and I know that, you talked about it briefly, but the depression and the suicidal ideation, I know that's something that a lot of the viewers can relate to, but you seem, because I have been very lucky to be able to become friends with you, and I follow you on social media, and you and your wife are lovely, and you seem like you're in a very happy place. First of all, is that true? Are you secretly miserable? And two, no, I don't think that's true. But how has that been? Because it is dark and it is scary when you first leave, but has it gotten better for you?
So, well, the quick answer is yes, and yes, we are both
Do you
very.
have any regrets, brother?
No, I don't have it. This is like those interviews at the Circuit Assembly. You know?
I know, I was just like, my only regret was not pioneering sooner.
But again, that just shows again the whole anecdotal thing. They never interview the people that aren't happy and leave to get a balance.
Yeah. I hated pioneering. It was miserable. Don't do it. All right, thank you, brother. Thanks.
Okay, so this is a bit of a complex answer, but the answer is yes. We don't regret it. We're very happy, but it took a long time to get there. So the immediate aftermath of me being disfellowshipped was devastating for my wife because, yes, it meant we had no social contact at all our friends. So in the congregation, you have many acquaintances, people that you may not normally be friends with. It's just because the common religion thing brings you together. But there's special kind of people you really click with. You like the same movies. You go on holidays with. You can raid their fridge. There's just no awkwardness, pretensions.
Yeah.
So, we had about 4 or 5 of the other couples that were like us, pioneers, elders, that we just really got on with, intellectually and same taste in things. So when I first left, out of respect to them, I went to each single one of the men in the couple, and I was up front with them. I said, "Look, this is what I believe now. This is where I am. I'm only telling you this now out of respect because I don't want to pretend to be something I'm not. I can pretend to be a witness and say all the right things and pretend I still believe it, but I don't want to do that. So I want you to know what I believe, and it's up to you now. Do you still want to be friends? And I'll totally understand if you don't want to be my friend anymore." And what warmed my heart at the time was every single one of them said, no, we respect your integrity, we respect who you are as a person, we don't care, we still want to be your friend. And I thought, wow, that's great, right? But of course, when you're officially announced as disfellowshipped, all that goes out the window. So, and that again proves that this is not a personal decision, because they will try and tell you, but when they announce that, it's each individual brother's personal decision to shun you. They're not directing people to shun you. But I got each of these persons confirmation that they had no wish to shun me. And they were fully aware that I was an atheist, right?
Yeah.
And that what I felt about the governing body. And with that full knowledge, they chose not to shun me. But when it was official, they made a different decision because they had no choice. They know that if they didn't shun me, they are next on the chopping block, right? So that's an aside. Yeah, so basically Melinda lost everything, There was an interesting shepherding call. So there's another elder, his name's Sam, lovely Italian brother. And again, like this guy, I love him. I still love him. He would give you the shirt off his back. He's just the kindest, nicest brother you'd ever meet. And yeah, I didn't find out later that he was one of the ones that disfellowshipped me. So I've got to go back again in the story a bit. Another day when I was having breakfast on a Sunday or lunch or something in my garden, he popped by to see my mum. And he popped into the yard. Actually, this must have been like a few weeks before the judicial hearing. And he was all like emotional. He was like, "Oh, Ben," he gave me a big hug. He was sort of like almost crying. He said, "We haven't seen you for so long. We really got to get together and go out for a cuppa and, chew the fat." Is that an expression in America? I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. And I said to him, "Sam, well, what's wrong with right now? Sit down. I'll make you breakfast. Let's catch up." And his answer was, no, I've got to go and do some calls, right? So he actually preferred to go and knock on empty doors to strangers instead of sitting down with one of his best mates years, right? And it wasn't until later I realised he was saying goodbye to me. That was his way of saying goodbye because he was on my judicial, he was one of the brothers on the committee. He knew what was going to happen within a week's time. He knew what was happening. That was his way of saying goodbye to me. Now, after I was disfellowshipped, I can't remember the time frame here. It might have been a few months later. They came and did a shepherding call on Melinda. So great. And like to their credit, they apologised for many things because Melinda. I've got to give you an aside too. I think this will shock a lot of people. Melinda was appalled by how I was treated, but also by how she was treated. Now, you got to Melinda is still an active, faithful JW sister, right? She never compromised her faith. She still believes in God and all that stuff, right? But now she wanted to tell the elders about, how they'd handled things, how they could have done it better, how hard it was for her as a sister, how disempowered she felt by the whole process, right?
Yeah.
So she requested a meeting with the entire body of elders to express herself, right? And the reason she did that is because she knew that the elders were speaking behind the back and not talking to us unless they had the okay from the society. And she just didn't want to play this game of Chinese whispers where one elder was telling another elder. She wanted them all to hear it from her mouth in the same moment, so there's no ambiguity about how she feels, right? Now, would you think that's a reasonable request? Doesn't James say if there's anyone sick among you, let him call the older men so you can be healed? Now, does say men in that scripture, call the older men. There's no limits on numbers. Oh my goodness, I still sound like an elder.
You snapped right back into it.
But they denied her. No, we'll meet with you true elders, but you have no right to demand that the whole body of elders meet with you. They just said, get back in your place, sister. You've got no right to request that. Anyway, so then on the shepherding call, Sam and this other elder, and again, they throw this young kid elder in who's like just been made an elder, has no idea what he's doing. How does he handle this? Anyway, so I said, look, if you're going to do a shepherding call, I played the little card about, I'm still the head of the house. I'm going to sit in. You can't meet with my wife without me being there. So they obviously, what can they say? They agreed to that. So I observed. And they're like, okay, Melinda, we're really sorry. We take your point that, this has been devastating for you. But from now on, we're going to do better. So we're here to say, what can we do for you now? Like, let's put all that in the past. From this moment on, what can we do that will help you make your life better, whatever? Okay. So she says, well, the first thing you can do is tell me who Ben's accusers are. The very first thing she asks, they deny her, right? They say, what can we do for you now? The very first thing she asks is, no, they say, no, we can't tell you that. All right. So then she says, well, how am I supposed to cope now? I can't, I've lost all my friends. Where do I go? Who can I have association with? No one. And they're like, well, you can always come over to our place. And she's like, well, no, I can't because I can't bring Ben. Well, you can come on your own. No, that's not how it works. You asking me to go out, leave my husband at home, that's not how a marriage works, right? Are you asking me to be unfaithful to my marriage vows, right? Treat my husband like he doesn't exist, right?
Yeah.
How can I go and come to your place? She said, I would love to come to your place. Will Ben be welcome? And she said, Ben can behave himself, and he will put his hand on his heart and say, right now, he's listening in. He will promise not to bring up religion or anything. He will just, we can just talk about the weather, whatever. And they're like, no, well, of course, it doesn't work like that, So again, second thing she asked for, no, we can't do that, right?
Oh, you're denying her 3 times like Peter.
Yeah, and I'm like, and I said to him, Sam, like, you said you were here to help, and yet you're denying everything she's requesting of you. Oh, because they're unscriptural. We have to do things scripturally. I said, come on, Sam. There's so many things you do that are not based in any Bible scripture. Shall I list them off? And I started rallying on. I said, let's talk about why you do all these things. There's no biblical basis for them. oh, now's not the time to go into those things. And I'm like, well, when is the time, Sam? Shall I come over next week and we can go through them all with you? Like, maybe before you disfellowshipped was the time to go through these unscriptural policies with you. Like, when is the time, Sam? Because you
Yeah.
didn't ever want to talk about this, right?
Yeah.
And I said to him, and I brought up the fact of that event where he said goodbye to me. I said, you knew you were going to disfellowship me. And I said to this to him, and I genuinely believe it. Of course, I cannot know how I would have reacted if the tables reversed, but I do know that when other elders' children were accused of apostasy, how I acted, and this is how I acted. So I'm pretty sure I know myself enough to know that if the shoe was on the other foot, I said, Sam, if you were the one that was on trial here, as my friend of 20 years, I would have come to you. You know, if I'd heard this rumours, oh, Sam's apostate, he's saying this and that about the governing body, or he's this, whatever, first thing I would have done to you is come to you and say, Sam, as friends, let's just sit down. You tell me what's the problem here. What are you going through? I would have wanted to hear from your mouth. And again, that's scriptural, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why did you never do that? Why did you not come? Why did you just believe what others said about me? Why did you, well, I saw your, you know, and no, he didn't. He didn't admit to seeing my interview. So he just heard what I'd said on the interview. I said, well, did you watch my interview? Did you not come and ask me directly what my issues were? And, you know, I gave him a commendation. I said, Sam, as I did before, I said, you are the most loving, kind person I know. But your religious policies are forcing you to deny your own empathy and humanity here. You've done nothing but treat a human being and myself with the most unloving, just horrible way. Where is your humanity? I know it's in there. And you know what? He just hung his head in shame. That's all he could do. He had no answer, no defense. He just hung his head in shame. And that makes me really sad because I know that this man is better than that, but he's constrained by the policies. It's not even the theology, it's just policies of an
It's the
organization.
policies. Yeah.
So obviously, you know, that was devastating and that didn't help our marriage. And obviously there's a lot of stuff I won't go into out of respect for Melinda in terms of our discussions with trying to come to a place where an atheist and a believer find common ground, right? So I won't comment on where Melinda is in her journey, her spiritual journey. One day she can tell that story. But what I will say is that we both loved each other very much and we're determined to make our marriage work. And I think that was the difference. And we discovered, because most marriages do not work, they will fail in such a situation. But I guess what we discovered through the process is we didn't fall in love because of our having the religion in common. We fell in love with each other, who we were, right? And that then is what enabled us to survive, but we couldn't do it on our own. It required a lot of personal therapy for each of us. It required a lot of couples therapy. So we found a wonderful organisation in Australia called Relationships Australia. So they're basically trained psychologists, therapists who specialise in relationships and communicating. Because one interesting thing is, or one thing we discovered about ourselves is that, you know, society is always saying, you know, secret to a good marriage is communication, right? Great. So how do you do it? They don't tell you how to do it, right? And they'll give you some vague sort of basic platitudes, you know, never be angry with each other and, you know, speak to each other respectfully and just pretty common sense stuff. What they don't teach you is how do you communicate in conflict. This was the problem for us because we had what you might think of as a perfect marriage. You know, I used to give all the talks on marriage. As an elder, I could choose, you know, which public talk outline I want to give. And I always gravitated towards the marriage ones because I was very proud and happy of our beautiful marriage and I and I felt like I could be passionate about that subject. So I was always talk about marriage. But because we had such a happy marriage and never argued or fought, and we just, when I went through my faith crisis and I changed in that sense, now there's this conflict. We didn't know how to deal with conflict, and that's where I would encourage anyone going through what we did. You've got to go to counselling and learn how to communicate effectively, because we weren't doing that. I was passionate about what I was learning and my new way of thinking, critical thinking, and we would have these arguments in therapy, and that's where the therapist helps us. Helped me to understand Melinda's values were different from mine. Like mine were always about. So, like for me, the most important thing is what's true. Right? In terms of the religious stuff, what is true comes first. For Melinda, it's family, community. That's her values. What's true comes down the list somewhere. She still cares about truth, right? But it's not as important as family and community. And that's
in terms of like the attachment to the religion and
stuff.
Yes.
So, we had to work through, we share very similar values in terms of being kind and honest and all those things. But in terms of what's important in terms of beliefs, we had quite a different hierarchy of values.
Yeah.
And that's where a therapist really helped us to understand each other and accommodate each other's differences. So I think we went to couples therapy for about a year. Actually, our therapist retired.
Oh, no.
But no, the job was done. We were in a place where we'd actually kind of didn't need it anymore. And I might say too, if anyone's thinking of or is going through therapy, it is painful. Like you go through, it's that old thing, you got to go through something worse before it gets better. Someday, and the therapist even told us, I don't want you discussing this until you're back in the next session next week. Don't discuss this outside of therapy. But it's a bit hard to do that. But some days we would leave therapy in tears and just think, how is this ever going to work? Like, we might as well just get lost. And we would talk about things and it would just blow up. But we stuck with it, and eventually we started applying what we learned, and it starts working. But there's a lot of pain you've got to go through, because a lot of it requires honest reflection of yourself, which is hard. And it's also then working through so many issues of repression in certain ways that we won't go into now. That's a whole other interview.
Well, what you were saying about how the organization, like, it will give sort of baseline, vague, generic good advice about communication, but are those police sirens coming through on the way?
They're coming to get you, Jake.
They're coming to...
The white straitjacket is coming.
They heard that I've got a powerful Watchtower higher up in my crosshairs. Yeah. When you were talking about the organization gives you kind of platitudes and, like, not necessarily bad advice, but in terms of the actual how to communicate and the nitty-gritty of it, it's not there. And I think the challenge that, Christina and I faced when we were, not on the same page was what you're supposed to do, like the advice, is to connect over the spiritual things. If you're a young couple who got married because that's just the only way that you can have sex or whatever, you don't know each other that well because you're not allowed to live with each other or date for too long before you get married. And so then I think some people, they end up miserable, but they have this thing that they can fall back on where they can communicate and sort of say the same things. They're reading a paragraph, saying an answer, nodding and smiling at each other, and that's kind of a substitute for a real relationship. And I think that it is a challenge when you strip that stuff away to be like, okay, well, what is left?
And in a mixed faith marriage, you don't have that in common anymore, and you can't even use that as a kind of benchmark to assess things. Like, the big problem for me, because, as an elder, I'm used to counselling people on the scriptures, right? So right. I would go in and say, hey, but darling, what about this? And quote a scripture to her as the basis of something. But in her eyes, as an atheist now, I've got no business quoting scripture to her anymore because I'm not a believer, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So my opinion of how that scripture should now be applied is completely invalid now because I don't believe
Yeah.
it as inspired of word of God. So that somehow devalues my application of it. So that is totally taken away from you now. So you have to find some other common ground, which is usually based on values. And it all just gets down to core
Yeah.
values, right?
I think for Christina and I, it was kind of amazing. What you were saying about how you didn't fall in love because of the religion. It was because of just your qualities. That was true of us. And I think we found very quickly that the only real issue we had in our marriage was the witness stuff. Like, obviously you're always going to have challenges and things like in disagreements, but we always communicated well, and it was just the organization thing was always the hiccup. And even when we were both a model couple in the congregation, the things that we felt bad about was like, oh, we don't want to go out in service. We haven't been able to hang out all week because we both work, and family worship. We really want to do that? And so, that weighs on you because you feel guilty because you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons why marriages can fail in that environment.
One thing that happened for us is it seems counterintuitive, but drew us closer together. We have an expression now: everyone is in a mixed faith marriage. Even two faithful JWs are in a mixed faith marriage because they actually believe different things. That might sound strange to a believing JW, but I was literally shocked how many things Melinda had a different take on. Because for me, as an elder,
Same.
I have to believe and teach official teachings, right?
Yeah.
As you know from your FAQ analysis, the society will do one thing for the inner circle and have a different kind of take on it for public consumption, right?
Yeah.
And what I found out is Melinda's belief was more based on that public policy stuff, not the hardcore inner stuff, right? Because as a sister, she doesn't have to teach this stuff. So she can have her own opinion on something and believe her own thing on whatever that is. But because she doesn't have to teach that or doesn't really get to express her beliefs, it's just that inner thing for her, right? Whereas for me, I got to toe the party line. So we were quite shocked once we started picking everything apart. I would say, what about this? And Melinda would say, well, I never really believed that anyway. This is what I believed.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, yeah, but then you're not really a JW if you don't believe that, because that's one of the teachings, right?
I'm like, but you're supposed to believe that.
Like, how dare you say I'm not a JW? Because I am one. That's how I identify. It's not for you to say I'm one. And I'm like, and she's like, that's not one of the core teachings. And I'd be like, yeah, but who are you to decide what the core teachings are? And what you can have a different opinion on. So we would have these endless sort of arguments like that. But at the end of the day, it drew us closer together because we learned how to have these much deeper arguments.
Yeah.
And we learned to see because we made a lot of assumptions about what we think and believe. Because I'm this elder thinking, oh, my wife believes all this stuff because that's what we're expected to believe.
Right.
And she's thinking, oh, my husband believes so-and-so because that's what she thinks, right? But we never talked about it, right? Because you don't.
Right.
As Melinda does point out, she will point out to you that she tried at times through our marriage to have certain conversations, but I would always shut them down. I would always like, no, we can't think that way because that's going to lead to, independent thinking and bad ways of looking at things. And so I was, as the good elder, always shut down that conversation. So now being open to that has actually brought us so much closer together. And we were close before, but now we have a level of emotional and intellectual honesty and closeness that is a beautiful thing to have in a marriage, right? And we didn't even know we didn't have it. Like, we were so happy with our marriage before, we didn't even miss what we didn't know we had or didn't have.
Yeah.
But now that we have this other thing, that just makes our marriage even more beautiful. I should also mention personally, so my whole time being a witness, I've always struggled with mental illness. So my dad's bipolar, my grandma was schizophrenic. I've always been depressed and slightly bipolar. I have anxiety disorder. So most of my life I've been on drugs or other things, just coping with this chronic depression and anxiety, right? Now you would think with me leaving the religion that would get worse, right? that would definitely be the story that they would tell. And it did get worse initially. I've never been suicidal before, and I definitely was suicidal for a few years off and on. But again, that was just a natural process of having your whole worldview upturned and everything you ever knew and believed completely reset. Like, that's just a natural response to that. But what I can say now, having gotten through all that, I'm so much happier. And it's not to say I don't have sad moments where I have to face some days I'll just literally have a cry because thoughts of my mortality come into my brain, and I just think, no, I can't cope with this idea of oblivion. I really do want to live forever. I can't cope with this thing. And I'll have a little bit of a cry and have a sad day. But I can say that I've never had chronic depression anymore like I had when I was a witness. I don't take medication anymore. I'm much more balanced, stable. And I don't know, I'm self-diagnosing here, but I think part of the reason I was so depressed as a witness is because I was bored out of my brain the whole time. Because I'm a person that needs intellectual stimulation. That's why I like science and all that stuff. I need to be always learning something new. When I'd give a public talk, or when I was at meetings, I've never enjoyed meetings, right? I never enjoy sitting there listening to a public talk. So I'd be preparing my own public talks. That was the one nice thing about being an elder. You're always preparing talks. So I could find intellectual stimulation in preparing my own things. But for me, it was never enough to give the talk from the outline. And I think a lot of people liked my talks. And one of the reasons was I'd always throw in some extra science or psychology or some worldly ideas. I used to give this talk on happiness and joy, and I'd throw in all this stuff on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Not in the outline, but to me, I needed to, again, that stimulation of other ideas, right? And I think that was part of why I was so depressed all the time. Is I didn't have. I realized something about myself after leaving is I don't have a spiritual need. That thing they say everybody has a spiritual need. I'm sorry, I actually don't have it. I convinced myself I had it because I was told everyone has one. So I made myself believe I have it. But I don't have a spiritual need, which is not to say I don't find awe in so many things, music and nature and whatever. But I do have a need for intellectual stimulation, which you don't get. Despite all the drama and pain and my marriage nearly failing and me nearly committing suicide, despite all that, I have no regrets. And I think Melinda, I will speak for her just on this one point. She would agree. She has no regrets, even though I've turned her life upside down. I made her life miserable. She says I ruined her life, and I did ruin her life. But to my surprise, she also wouldn't go back to how things were. Also is happier and loves our marriage the way it is now, for so many reasons. So I think that's a testimony to the fact that it can work. It does get better. There is light on the other side if you put the work in. It's a lot of hard work. But
and even for people who aren't married, I think it's just good to know that that initial upheaval is not forever, and that there are things about your witness life that will be way sadder than anything in your post-witness life. For people who decide to fully leave. I felt when we were doing kind of a pre-interview chat, we were talking about that thing of just that you were bored. And I had never thought about that, but that's so true. One of the privileges that you have as a man in the organization is they give you stuff to do to keep you busy so that you don't just have to sit and listen to the meetings.
Yeah.
And when
I
I,
could have bring microphones rather than sitting.
oh my, right. Do microphones, be an attendant, do the
Yeah,
sound system, or and then maybe you're giving talks or
yeah,
whatever. And especially at assemblies and conventions, which are like 8 hours long, if you can have multiple assignments where you're running around and you're never actually just sitting and listening. And I now realize like I never was just enjoying sitting and listening to a meeting or the ministry. And I had that similar thing where I don't have a spiritual need. And then weirdly, I think it causes a sense of depression because a part of your brain knows like I'm reaching for something that's kind of not authentic. Like I don't really want to believe this, or I don't, but I'm kind of forcing myself. You're sort of adopting a role that's maybe not natural to you. And when you strip that away, you can just be more like, this is who I am. And for
yeah,
some people that's doing donuts in the parking lot outside.
yeah. But the guilt kicks in, right? You are so conditioned
Yeah.
to feel like this is who you are supposed to be and what you are supposed. And again, you'll see this in the literature, and I think you've pointed out very well in a lot of your videos. You're told what to think. Aren't we so excited, brothers, to have this new information? Like you are told not just the information that you're told this is true, but you're told how to receive it, what to think
We just
about.
love this. We just love this, don't we?
So if you don't think that way, then you feel there's something wrong with you. So an example of this,
Yeah.
as active and as devoted to everything that I was, as I explained earlier, when I would go on holidays, I would just want to have a break from everything. So if we go away, I didn't want to go to the meeting or go witnessing or do our family study. I want a break from all of that, right?
Yeah.
Most of my fellow elders were like, "Oh no!" When we went to the meeting and we went out witnessing the brothers down at the beach with them, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, that sounds great." I pretend, but in my back of my mind, I'm thinking, "What's wrong with me that I don't enjoy that spiritual activities? I want a break from spiritual activities." And so the guilt then that you have, like that you don't measure up. One of the worst things for me, I don't know if I mentioned this to Fifth, but even doing everything I was doing and how devoted I was, I never felt I was good enough. I always used to have Armageddon anxiety dreams where I was there and there was the fireballs are raining down and one was just about to hit me because there's this anxiety in the back of my mind that there's a secret sin or something I'm not measuring up to or
You could
something
have done more.
I could have done more. That's a lot of, I don't swear, but you know what I mean? That's a lot of stuff to deal with.
Yeah.
And, one of the great things now is just not having all that guilt, and being authentic. And, I haven't changed much as a person. I'm not one of those people that because I think a lot of JWs, when they leave, they go through this phase, this rebellion phase. They're going to try everything I couldn't do as a witness, so they're going to
Yeah.
and have polyamorous relationships and do this and do that. And it's like, okay, that's never who I am. It's not whether I was a witness or not. It's just not me. I never felt the need to do any of that. And basically, if you met the elder me and the me now, I swear you would not tell the difference. When I'm literally the same person. The only difference now is the internal stuff where I don't feel guilty for not wanting to do spiritual things or whatever. But all my same values. This is one thing that early on, I guess, really helped my wife to think. I came home one day, I said to her, look, you know what's weird? It goes back to the Holy Spirit thing. It's like when you look at the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, kindness, patience, I said to her, do you think I'm now worse at those things or deficient in those qualities some way since I left? Have you seen a change in me displaying those qualities? And she's like, no. She's like, in some ways you're more kind and more tolerant or whatever. And then the next question is, well, how do you explain that? If I'm now a God-denying atheist, I have no Holy Spirit, how do you explain that I'm still displaying the fruits of the Spirit? Well, the simplest explanation is those things are just who I am. And I was always going to be that person, whether I was in a religion or not, right? It's
Yeah.
not the religion that gave me those qualities. That's just who I am. And when you are genuine to who you are, and who you are might be that other person that wants to do whatever they want to do, right? Again, I'm not judging. I'm just saying this is, and that's the thing, that religions like JWs, they fit people who are like me, and other people they don't fit. Like, you've mentioned this too. When you're a white cisgender male, the religion suits you perfectly fine. If you're a
Yeah.
non-binary or gay or something else, or you got a rebellious streak or an anti-authority streak, then it's not going to suit you, right? You're not never
Yeah.
going to fit in and be genuine to yourself. So I guess I was just lucky that I always fit in because it is part of who I am. And really the only reason I left is because it's not true, and that's it. It doesn't align with my sense of intellectual honesty and integrity. That for me is the core issue. Nothing, we can talk about the harm the organisation does and the child abuse and all that stuff. And yes, I understand all that. At the end of the day, it's just not true. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
And I care about
Yeah.
what I do.
I really love that. I agree. And I think that you are a person who I feel like I can imagine you as an elder, because I knew elders that were in people who leave sometimes forget this, that like all witnesses are three-dimensional people, just people. And like you said, people who are just warm, good people on the inside of the religion. They continue to be that on the outside. And some people, maybe they do struggle with certain things, and a structure like a religion helps them in some way because they need some kind of structure. But people are just people.
At the end of the day, like I've mentioned some elders' names here and I've paid them out a bit. But at the end of the day, I understand them.
Yeah.
I know, like that elder Sam. Let me tell you another story about him, if I may. A few months ago, we were out and about at a wine festival or something. He's a cleaner, so he was going around emptying the bins and stuff. He saw Melinda and I. Now, again, I didn't make an issue of it. I didn't say, "Hey, Sam, come and talk to us." I just respected his right to ignore me, but he saw Melinda and he made the decision to come over and talk to Melinda. So they talked for 10 minutes and obviously he ignored me completely. And when he was leaving, he said, "Well, it was nice to see you." And me, just being having a bit of a jab, I just said, "Oh, I hope it was nice to see me too, Sam." And he came right up to me like this, put his face right in mine, like really aggressive, with eyes burning with rage. And he said, "If I had my way," like poking in my chest, "if I had my way, I would throw you off a cliff."
Whoa.
Again, this is the man that I said is the nicest, kindest man you'd ever meet. He had such hate in his voice.
Wow.
And he literally threatened violence against me.
Oh
Now,
my God.
even so, I understand him, because he doesn't see me as a human anymore. He sees me as
Yeah.
the devil. He sees me as an enemy. And I get that. And I would be his friend again tomorrow if he somehow escaped his indoctrination and came to me and said, "Look, I'm sorry, Ben, I wasn't myself." I'd be friends with him again tomorrow. I would hold no
Yeah.
ill will against him, because I know and understand that he's only doing that because he sees me as the enemy. And not only that, because we were close friends, like I have other witnesses that still talk to me, who are not elders, just average rank and file members who can see me as a human and respect our differences. But the difference with him is we were on the cold front. We were brothers in arms as elders, right?
Yeah.
We were there. So not only am I the enemy, he feels betrayed. And that's where it's coming from, a sense of betrayal. Now, I feel betrayed by the religion teaching me lies, right? But he feels betrayed by the fact that I left and disowned everything we worked towards. So I can understand that betrayal and viewing me as an enemy, and I just have to live with that. But I feel sad for him that he treats people based on those feelings, because I felt betrayed too, but I've gotten over that, right? I've gotten past that sense of betrayal.
Yeah.
I don't hate the organisation. I understand what it is, the nature of the beast. It's the self-perpetuating delusion, in my opinion. But I get it, right?
Yeah.
And I have no ill will towards it or hatred towards it. I pray that it will improve and the policies will improve and it'll get more mainstream and less harmful over time. But I get it. But you see, he cannot get rid of that betrayal, that sense of betrayal, and he will hate me till he dies, I'm sure, right?
Well, I think that hatred probably comes from a certain amount of cognitive dissonance that you stirred up in him, where he realizes, well, this could happen to me too, because this is a smart person who I respect and I worked with, and now I'm questioning things that I know I'm not supposed to, so I hate myself, and I'm worried about my relationship with Jehovah, and so all that stuff, he's throwing onto you.
Another wonderful thing about life afterwards is that there is community, but you have to be careful. Um, the XJW community is not community, right? That's an artificial online thing that exists. And again, and anyone who's been in that community for any length of time will discover it's just as full of drama and angst and everything else as it is in the congregation, because it's a bunch of people that are only united by one thing, which is the religion they left, right? What is beautiful about community afterwards is being able to define your own community and finding real friends based on your values. So for instance, one of the most beautiful things to me is being able to choose my friends, not based on the fact that we think alike or share the same religion, but based on the character of the person. So, I have atheist friends, obviously, we think alike, but I have Christian friends, I have other friends, and it doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is the quality, character, the thinking of the person, and that's a beautiful thing. So what I have now, which is part of what makes me so happy, is I have a small, intimate group of friends. A couple of them are ex-elders like myself. One is an ex-Bethelite. You don't need a lot of friends for community. You just need a few good ones, right? We talk, almost every day or every week. If we're not chatting online, we sort of get together once a week and have a chat for a few hours. And we talk about intimate and deep things. And we have such a close bond of friendship, but that bond is based on our mutual respect and character of who we are, not on us all agreeing about everything. So I would encourage people, if you're looking for that, that is one of the blessings. There is community, there is family, there is life afterwards, but it's not to be found in that big, broader sense. And there's a lot of pain and drama. You just need to find the people that share your values, who stand by you no matter what, and people you can have open and honest dialogue with, which means you won't always agree, you won't always think alike. That's true friendships and community, right? And that is a more beautiful friendship than the ones we had in the organisation, which, as we found out, were dependent on our loyalty to the organisation. So, and can I just point out too that people need to understand, and we can be sympathetic a bit here too. We were all taught that it's not about our reward, it's all about loving God. We don't worship faith, we don't worship, it's not about what we're getting out of this. That's a lot of BS, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's not true. It's just not
true. At the end
true.
of the day, it's all about the reward. And that's why we are a threat. That's why they are so scared of me and you. Because at the end of the day,
reward and the fear of the punishment.
We are a threat that they will lose their reward. If they listen to it, so I'll give an example. That book I was talking about, The Art of Thinking Clearly, when the elders were trying to help me before it all escalated, I said to them, if you want to help me, you need to understand me. So just read this little book. It'll take you an hour. You'll understand what triggered my questioning, right? And then we can have a discussion. And again, these men who claim they would die for me would not even take an hour out of their life to read a book, a very small book that would take them an hour, and JWs do so much reading all the time. It's not like they couldn't have just stopped reading a Watchtower for 30 seconds and read something different. And it's just a book on thinking. It's not an apostate book. It's not attacking religion.
Yeah.
Just a book on biases and how to think. And the fact that he couldn't even be bothered, the fact that he didn't care enough to help me to do what he needed to do to help. So they have this formula. we're going to help you by quoting scriptures at you, right?
Yeah.
That's the only way they know how to help you, right? So
Right.
we can't help you by quoting scriptures at you. We're not going to even try and understand you better or get to the bottom of. And that's what they're supposed to do. What led to the sin? What are the circumstances that they're supposed to try to get to the bottom of it. At the end of the day, they don't care. They just want to apply this formula that they know, and they know if this can happen to Ben being he was, if he can be deceived and become an apostate, how scary for me, like I can't
Yes.
Ben,
Yes.
because whatever affected him could easily affect me, and then I'm going to lose out in paradise. And that's the equation at the end of the day. And that's why our family won't talk to us, why our family won't listen to reason. At the end of the day, your family care more about getting to paradise than they care about you.
Yeah.
And that's hard truth to accept because it shows how selfish they are, really, at the end of the day. But that's the reality of it.
I think it's a fear of the knowledge that if they're wrong, they will have to go through the same exact thing that they just put you through.
Yeah. And again, you can understand they haven't seen the other side because they don't want to see
Right,
that.
yeah. They only know the cartoonish version of
I
it.
only saw the hard bit where you were unhappy and angry and all. I only saw the negative feelings, right? They didn't
I'll tell
see you
you.
come out the other end.
Well, I'll say this, and well, actually, okay. Let me do a wrap up here, and I'll tell you that because this is about me, so it's not that important. Ben, this has been such a great conversation. I could obviously talk to you forever. Thank you so much for sharing all this. You also did an interview on the Marriage is a Tightrope podcast, right? Is that still up if people wanted to?
Yes, I'll probably have to find a link and send that to you because it'd be hard to find. I don't know what episode number it was.
Oh, that's fine. I can try and look it up too.
They didn't use our real names to protect Melinda's.
Oh, okay.
But yes, we did an anonymous interview about our mixed faith marriage and what helped in surviving in a mixed faith marriage and what we learnt along the way there. Yeah, so that's worth maybe putting a link to in the what they say. We'll put a link down below.
Yeah, in the description. Yeah, that's right. And like and subscribe, hit the bell, all that stuff. Ben, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. It's been an honor. Thanks for talking to me.
When I was first deconstructing and researching stuff, you become a bit paranoid, is this document I'm seeing online, is it authentic? Has it been doctored? So at one point, I actually rang the society because I was looking for an old, Russell era Watchtower quote. And I didn't trust what was online. So I rang Bethel and said, hey, can you send someone down to the library and make a photocopy of this page of the 1916 Watchtower or something? Because I want to check from a trusted source that I'm not looking at a doctored, document.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't do it.
Really?
Yeah. No, we haven't got time for that. No, we're not going to muck around for people. It's like, again, so that just showed me they don't really
So what do they do? What's their job then, even?
Exactly.
No, we don't really want to do that.
But they'll say to the brothers, check your sources, make sure you're not, don't trust what you read online. But when you actually do what they say and don't trust what you read online and want to get the source correct, they won't help you.
That's why.
Too much trouble for them to go down and do a photocopy for you. Like that little moment was another moment in my deconstruction that said, well, okay, you really don't care.
Yeah. You don't they don't care.
You say you give your life for people, but you can't even be bothered to go down the hall and do a photocopy for someone. Would you really die for someone then? No, I don't think so.
I'd rather die than make this photocopy. Yeah. That's great. Hey, this is a great bonus clip at the end. What a great, perfect little anecdote. That's great. Yeah. Okay.
It just reminds me that
my cat is peeing on the carpet. Oh my God. Echo, no.